Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm your host, Dr. Haider Shah. On behalf of Calwas, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Today, we have another very interesting topic, and I'm really honored to welcome and introduce our distinguished guest speaker who is going to talk about a smart university leveraging technology for better teaching and learning. Today's world is evolving and changing because of globalization and digitalization, and particularly the role of technology is so much important. So how to take advantage of technology, in particularly in education sector, you will get the best insights about all these things because we have an expert with us in today's this session. So stay tuned because an amazing stuff are coming ahead in this session. So before we start, I would like to thank Kalwas for arranging such enlightenment sessions, for their support and providing us such a wonderful platform. The aim of Kalwas is to give you the opportunity to connect and interact with world-renowned speakers, academic leaders, teachers, authors, researchers, experts, professionals, and businessmen to learn from their experiences, recommendation, and suggestions, which will create an impact and will enable you to learn and develop yourself in order to grow and transform individually, as well as to contribute to the world in a positive way. As our slogan is come, learn, and share knowledge. So today we have an amazing person as guest, a man with an amazing great qualities, having vast experience and exposure, and a internationally known and recognized speaker. He worked with multiple organizations on multiple positions in worldwide and one of the talented expert in the field. We always see him on different platforms while contributing to the field and world. Moreover, through his great knowledge and wisdom, people are getting the right guidance and knowledge. So let me introduce him formally. He took his undergraduate degree from the North Texas State University, his master's degree from the University of North Texas, and his PhD from the University of Missouri, Columbia. His dissertation was on 15th century school and the transmission of humanism through pre-university education in North Europe. He also has fields in American colonial history, medieval and the Renaissance studies, the early modern Europe. He reads classical and medieval Latin, French, and German, and he is conversant in German and French. He was awarded a fellowship at the master's level and was the teaching assistant for the chancellor for the University of Missouri. He's published in the field of medieval history, online education, business management, and supply chain logistics. Moreover, he has been the active international post secondary and higher education since 1988. He was responsible for creating and administering Europe's first online MBA program under the High Business School Group in France. He was also responsible for developing and launching the UK's first online BA honors degree for uh, responsible through the NCC education. Moreover, a program that was deployed through NCC Education 350 centers in 45 countries. Following the assignment, he was recruited by the Laureate Online Education as the international director, late assumed the role of chief academic officers of the University Liverpool / the Laureate partnership, where he launched the most successful online program to date, a Master of Public Health, and mapped out program development across several disciplines. He also launched the least expensive online degree program available in the United States by working with the Sailor Academy and City Vision University. He also served as a chair for of the Social and Culture Studies Department for Stephens College, Dean of International Studies for City Vision University, and Executive Director of Bellevue University Center for Online Studies, where he managed all product development and online courses. Moreover, he has also consulted for pharmaceutical, the Michigan Community College Association, and uh, ben- uh, several for-profit universities and venture capital funds. Uh, in line with that, in the capacity as the executive director of online education, Bellevue University. He has served in the capacity of dean of the Westford Education Group, an international post-secondary education group with the 7 campuses in the UK, UAE, India, and Africa. In addition to that, he understands the practical education for working adults and is fully versed in UK, French, and US higher education pathway. He is a preliminary dedicated to student enhancement and providing access to higher education for those who cannot take up traditional progression routes. Last but not the least, he is a wonderful speaker, author, teacher, researcher, expert, professional, and above everything, a great human being. So please help me in welcoming our guest, Dr. William Pinter. Welcome to Calva's platform, and thank you very much for joining us, Prof.
Wow, I'm a little embarrassed by that introduction. I was wondering if you're really talking about me or somebody else.
Because your achievements, Prof. Really great to go through your bio. Really wonderful bio, Prof. Yes.
I'm in Iowa in the United States, which is right in the middle of the country, and it's called the Midwest. And Midwesterners never take compliments very well. We're always like, well, it wasn't really, it's a very humble people. So if you want to make a Midwesterner uncomfortable, give them a compliment. So anyway, thank you very, very, very much. It's really a big honor, really special for me to be here and talking about what makes a smart university. As you know, I've been doing this a long time, and in order to understand what a smart university is, I think it's important to understand what the non-smart or the history of universities. So I'm gonna if you wouldn't mind, there you go. So
yes,
just this slide here, and then you can make it go away. Anybody who looks at this slide, anybody who's been to university knows what this is. Okay, it's a classroom, right? It's a classroom, and this is from the 1200s. All right, 1200s. So for close to 1,000 years, we've been teaching and learning the same way. You can see the professor up there reading, right? And the students, and look at the students. I mean, it's a classic classroom. You got one, maybe 2 of them have fallen asleep. You got a couple of them chatting in the back room. It's a classic classroom for university. Now you can make that go away, and I'll explain it to you later. That's an image from the 1200s. And the reason I'm showing this to you is that universities haven't changed very much in the last 1,000 years. The gentleman standing up at the top is giving a lecture. All right. Well, everybody knows what a lecture means, but what he's doing, if you look at him very closely, he's got a book in front of him, and he is reading out of that book. So lecture or lectura means to read. So what he's doing is he's standing up and reading to the students. And you look at the students, they all have books they're writing in. So they're writing down his words, word for word. And that book that he's reading out of, it could be Aristotle's Ethics, it could be Thomas Aquinas, it could be whatever they're studying. But books were rare. They were very rare, and they weren't printed. They were all handwritten. And so for these students to get a book, he would read it to them and they would write it down. So at the end of the course, they all had a book. Okay. And that's how they built their libraries. Now, if you think lectures are boring now, all right, they were really boring in the 1200s because he's simply reading to you out of a text. Every now and then they might explain a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but those were called interlinear notes or marginalia. If you were to look at the actual text itself, you would see that they copied it all down very meticulously. Now, when you took a course, you copied the book, you had commentary by the instructor, and that was delivering content. Okay, that's how they delivered the content, was by reading this book to you, and you would write it down. But that doesn't mean you learned it. All right, this means you listened and you copied. Where the real learning happened was in the dormitories. So at the University of Paris or the University of Oxford or University of Cambridge, these original Bologna in Italy, the original universities, they all had dorms, places where the students lived. And so in the dorms, you can't have a bunch of young men unsupervised. We all know what happens, okay? Trouble. That's what happens, trouble. So they would have a faculty member who would reside there with them to kind of supervise them. And they would engage in these great debates around the content. One of the most famous professors was a man by the name of Abelard, Peter Abelard. And he wrote a book called Yes and No, sic et non in Latin, yes and no. And so he would propose a topic like nature is inherently evil, okay? Just a random topic. And then on the one side, he would say yes, and the students would debate yes, and the other students would debate no. And so they would hone and finely tune their debating and analytical skills using evidence, supporting their assertions and their arguments. And sometimes these got really quite lively. I mean, this was the age when people carried swords, and so these debates could get violent. And there's evidence that they would run through the streets of Paris with their swords drawn, saying, "Give me the head of a nominalist," or "Give me the head of a realist." The nominalism and realism were two schools of thought, two philosophical schools. And so they would have sword fights. And then in order to graduate, you would stand up and you would debate a topic. Not unlike defending your dissertation or your thesis today. But the real learning happened in the dialogue, in the discussion, in the interactions that happened they were called bursa in the dormitories. Now, the greatest innovation ever in higher education was the book. All right, because it was a way that you could physically transmit information from one person to another. And they were all handwritten, and they were written on vellum, sheepskins, okay? And I want you to think about the fact, now these folks here are beautifully colored robes and so on. I think it's an Italian institution. But think about graduation. When you go to graduation, everybody's wearing these long robes and funny hats, okay? Well, those are monks' robes, okay? We still dress up like monks going to university. And in fact, if you're an undergraduate, you have a sleeve you have a sleeve that comes down to here. If you have a master's, you have a longer sleeve, and a PhD has a much longer sleeve with a hood. These are all the kinds of things that monks would wear. And I always laugh at graduation because typically graduation happens in the spring, and it's hot. And so you got all these kids and faculty members wearing these long, black, heavy robes in the heat. And everybody's going, "Oh, I hate this. Why are we doing this?" Well, in Northern Europe, it kept you warm. And so we've completely forgotten why but we just keep with the ceremonies. So universities we like to pretend that universities are innovative, but actually universities are very, very slow to change. All right, they're very slow to change. So let's take a look at the book. All books were handwritten. And in fact, you can do a kind of a genealogy or a DNA tracking of books. Because if I'm copying a book, I'm a monk and I'm in a library and I've got a book here I'm reading from and I'm copying it word for word, it's boring. All right. I could fall asleep. Or maybe I start thinking about what's for dinner. And I lose my attention, and so I make a mistake in copying. Okay, it's very simple to make a mistake, and then when someone copies my book, they copy that mistake, and so we can actually track those mistakes to get the original text. It's called a first edition or edited edition, and I was engaged in a project where I would line by line through Latin. Copy the mistakes, find out where they were, and trace the mistakes back to the original textbook. And it was on Alhazen's treatise on optics, the great Arab philosopher. And it was being copied in Europe, and it was the basis for Newton's optics. So all the manuscripts were handwritten, which meant they were very expensive. And they lasted a really long time. They're still in libraries. When I did my research, I was lucky enough to get to handle some original manuscripts. Now, when the printing press came along, all right, in the 1500s, the Gutenberg press, it was a revolutionary because that meant there weren't any more errors that could be made. You set the type and you printed it, and every page looked the same. Okay, there were no errors at all. It was a reliable source of information. And can we go to the next slide? Yeah, I could do that one. All right, so here is what those first texts looked like. All right, now if you look at it really close, I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like it's handwritten. It doesn't look printed. Compare this to any printed page that we have today. Okay, this appears to be written by hand. They're called incunabula, and in fact, the first books were made to look like handwritten texts. All right, why would they do it like that? Well, because that's what people expected to see. People expected to see a book was something that you hand wrote, not printed. They didn't understand printing, so the first books were the incunabula were made to look like woodcuts. They look like woodcuts, and there's some of the famous. There are some famous texts that still survive today. In 1450, they had movable type, metal letters, and just like the internet, all these printers wanted to print something. They wanted to make money, right? So if I print a book, I can sell a book, and I can print like lots of books. I don't have to have handwritten monks. So what do I want to print? Well, they wanted to print something people wanted to read. Okay, so they were desperate for poetry or classical works, and in fact, the most famous book, most popular book at the time, was called The Ship of Fools, and it was printed in the early 1500s, and it was really bad poetry. It was that sort of iambic pentameter, da 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 da. It was really, it's like, oh, really? This is what people read? Well, the literacy rate was quite low, so someone would read it aloud to an audience, and then they could remember it because of the rhythm of the text and because it rhymed. And every poem had a picture, and the whole book was about fools, like foolish professors like me, or foolish students who wasted their time sleeping during the day, or foolish husbands, there were 100 of them in this book. And so it was entertaining and interesting, but it was a way to distribute information. Now, that single technological innovation made for enormous change, not only in universities, but in culture as well. It was the printing. Without printing, you wouldn't have had the French Revolution. Without printing, you wouldn't have had the Enlightenment. Without printing, you wouldn't for example, I talked about Newton, right? Newton and reading Alhazen's critical edition on optics. He could have a whole set of texts around him that contradicted each other. And then he would go look for himself, and he would do his own experimenting. So if I'm reading this author and he says one thing, and I read another author and he says something else, how am I going to resolve it? Well, I'll resolve it through my own experience. I'll go look, okay? And so that's where Isaac Newton developed his thesis on calculus and on optics, and on how we see things. And I'll tell you this, the guy was, I know you've heard of Newton, the guy was crazy. I mean, he took knitting needles, those really long, get my fingers, really long needles that people use to make stuff and to knit, and he would stick them up in his eyeball socket and squeeze his eye and note that it distorted his vision. So he knew that if he could, that's nuts, but that was Isaac Newton. And so he's curious. He has a mind that can absorb massive amounts of information. And for the first time in human history, he could put books around him and look at these various copies of these books and realize that he had to go look for himself. Well, that's the basis of scientific endeavor, is to go and look for yourself. It led to a revolution in the Western church. I don't know how familiar you are with Western theology, but before the printing press, it was all the Catholic Church out of Rome. That's where all those monks were, going to university, wearing those black robes. They were all, members of the Catholic Church. And then the printing press comes along, and Luther, this little monk, another monk, he wrote a series of statements to be debated, and some printer got a hold of them and printed copies of it and distributed. And before we knew it, we had we call in the West a Reformation, where they broke off from the Catholic Church. It caused a whole series of wars as a result of it. And Henry VIII and his wives and all that kind of stuff, all because of a technology that allowed people to share information, except in the university. Now, if you think about universities for a minute. We're going to go away from history and talk about universities. My university experience and my father, he was a professor, his university experience were really very similar. Okay, we both had to go to class. We sat in class like those monks that you saw earlier. Took notes. We went to the library if we wanted a book. We had to go to the library. There were these card catalogs. You probably don't even use them anymore. And you would sort of thumb through authors, and then what I did is I'd get a couple of good citations. I'd go up into the stacks, and then I could browse around and find books I didn't know existed or authors I didn't know existed. Kind of like a search that you do sitting at home. Well, I was working on my PhD, my dissertation, and I was doing exactly that, going to the library every day, sitting there. I mean, I had to check out books, and at the end of the term, I took my car. I have a car full of books that I had to return to the library. And my wife came home one day and she said, I've just been to the University of Heidelberg. I said, no, what are you talking about? Don't talk rubbish to me. And she goes, no, I have. It's a technology called a gopher. And you can look and see what holdings they have at the University of Heidelberg. I said, oh, you got to show me. And so we went down to the university and we sat in front of a computer screen. And she said, and it was called a gopher because it would go for you. Okay. It was an old technology. Maybe there's some old folks in the audience that remember gopher and fetch and a number of other old pieces. And it would connect to the University of Heidelberg. You could browse their holdings. You couldn't read them, but you could browse their holdings. Well, at that moment, I realized that this was the new technology. This was the print technology. This was how we could share, distribute information without having a carload of books that you have to go to the library to check out. We just sat there and did it. And then I realized, if you could do that, you could teach people. You could teach people, people who went to university were people who had free time, who had money, who could attend a class from 9 to 9:50 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't know how you organize your classes, but that's how they were organized at my university. Or, a Tuesday, Thursday class, or a once a week 3-hour class at night, which nobody wanted to do. And you had to physically go. If you didn't go, you couldn't pass the class. And yet here was a technology that would allow us to reach anybody, anywhere, where they didn't have to go, where they could actually have a job and they could actually improve their lives and their careers through attending university. So when Dr. Haider Shah talks about how I focused on pathways for people removing obstacles, this is where that comes from. I wanted to be able to reach people who could not go to university because they're smart, they're aspirational, they have a lot of energy. Why shouldn't they have access to higher education as well as the monks? So at this point, and in fact, when I launched the online MBA out of Europe, I tried to work with universities in the States, and none of them were interested. Nobody can learn online. How can you teach online? And I'm like, well, let me explain to you how you can do it. And no, we can't do that. We don't know how to do that. So this French woman, director of a grande école in France, she said, "Can you help us build an online MBA?" And I was like, "Oh boy, yes, I can." So we built it because the French are funny people and very creative, but they're a funny group. I gave a presentation in front of the National Assembly about online education. I gave presentations in front of the managers of information technology groups about online education. And the funny thing is, they had a technology in France called oh gosh, I can't remember it now. It was an old technology nobody uses anymore, and it had just something. They had access to databases. Well, the internet replaced all of that, and so now, instead of a carload of books, I have a phone. I have more information right here than I had in my car, full of books. I mean, when I wrote my dissertation, I had literal stacks of books around, and a microfilm reader, and I was trying to find something. Oh, I think it was in this book, and I'd have to go make notes and thumb through pages. Well, now I just search. I just type the search term and it pops up. So my research time is significantly reduced. But universities were very unwilling to move. I had been out of the classroom for a number of years, and I thought, I want to see what these young kids are doing. So I got hired as an adjunct to teach some basic freshman level courses at the local university. And I like teaching. I like kids. I like teaching kids. I like engaging around content. I don't lecture. I never lecture. Just like I'm not reading stuff to you right now. If I wanted to read something to you, I give it to you and you can read it, and then we can talk about it. So I watch these students, these young students, and before class, they're in the hallways waiting for the bell to ring or whatever, the signal will go off. And what are they doing? Well, they're looking at their phones, or they've got their laptops up, or they got their tablets, and they're all busy doing stuff. All right. And then the bell rings, and they put all that stuff away, and they walk into the classroom, and they take out paper and pencil. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is wrong. This is backwards. Why are you putting away technology that can actually help you? And you've all just turned into monks, handwriting your books again. So I told them, if you have a question you want to ask, use your device. Ask your device first, and then let's talk about your answer. Rather than saying, when was the War of 1812? Okay, look it up right now. You can ask. That's a simple factual question. You can look it up. But then the more important questions are, why was there a War of 1812? Why did the winners win? Why did the losers lose? And what were the repercussions of the War of 1812? Now, that's interesting stuff. That's something I want to talk about. That's something you will want to talk about because everybody's got an opinion. But we don't have to waste our time looking up silly facts. Asking me a question, a factual question in class is a waste of my time and a waste of your time because I might not know. I might say, I don't know. I'll have to look up when the War of 1812 was, when in fact they can look it up themselves and we can move on from there. Smartphones, tablets, watches. I haven't gotten into the watch thing yet. I mean, I get my email on a phone. I get my email on a laptop. I get my email on a tablet. And I'm not sure I actually need a watch to get my email, but people do. And so I'll be talking to them, and they'll checking the time. No, they're not checking the time. They're reading a message, a message right there, right there on their wrist. They're reading, they're communicating, and that's what higher education is all about. It's about communicating and interacting. It's about being in that dormitory with Peter Abelard, talking about interesting questions and debating them. Okay, that's what education is about. The word education it's a Latin word. It comes from a Latin word. Means ex ducere. Ex means out of, and ducere means to lead. To lead education, ex ducere, it means to lead you out of something. It doesn't say lead you to something. It means lead you out of being ignorant, lead you out of the darkness, into a discussion. So it's not predictive. It's not predictive. Higher education should not be predictive. If you want to learn how to drive a car, all right, that's called training. But if you want to understand why we have cars and not trains or buses, what the impact of the automobile is on the economy, on the world climate, that's education, because we don't have clear answers to those kinds of questions. Now, what is a smart university? Well, during the pandemic, every university around the world went, whoa, we should have thought more about that online piece. and as much fun as it is for me to say, I told you so, it's not fun, because the pandemic has been a terrible, terrible event for all of us. I know that we all know someone who has suffered and passed away because of this terrible pandemic. And I've given funerals for dear friends. I was talking to a colleague of mine in Bangkok, and he has an IT problem. And every time he hires an IT person, they end up sick in the hospital because it's still rampant. Well, what did that mean for universities? That meant you didn't go to class. That meant that it closed down. That meant that people didn't enroll. And all of a sudden, these universities are walking around going, oh, is there another way for us to reach the students? And so they rushed to online delivery. Now, most of the online delivery that you see or may have experienced is soul-killingly dull. All right? It's read this, write this, respond to this, rinse and repeat. Okay? And think about how we are still at the incunabula stage. We're still at the stage of that paper that you've got up on the screen there, because we have web pages. Okay? Well, there's no page. There's no page in a web page. We call it a web page. We make it look like a page out of a book because that's what we expect to see. Okay? Just like people expected to see pages that look like someone had handwritten them. Okay? They didn't expect Times New Roman font or whatever font you use. They didn't expect, so they didn't see that. They didn't make that for them. There's a wonderful video. Everyone should watch it. You look it up. It's called the Gorilla video. You can look it up on YouTube, and it's an experiment. And the video goes like this. It's introduced. There are these young people who are passing a basketball around. There's a group wearing white t-shirts and a group wearing black t-shirts, and you are supposed to count the number of times the basketball is passed by the people who are wearing white t-shirts. And, that can be a little confusing, right? You're watching, a dozen people moving around and passing a basketball, and you're counting. I did this experiment with my colleague in Bangkok. I said, watch this, David. And he did. He said, oh, I only counted 15 or 10. He said, but they told me that there was 15 passes they made. I said, David, you missed the whole point, because while you're watching this video, a man in a gorilla suit, well, maybe a woman, but I'm assuming it's a man in a gorilla suit, walks across the stage, waves, and walks over. Now, 80% of the people who watch that video don't see the gorilla. Okay. And you think, well, how's that possible? How's it possible for a man in a gorilla suit walks right through? He's not hiding. He's not trying to be, sneaky. He walks right through, stands in the middle and waves and walks offline. And David never saw it. He didn't see it because he wasn't expecting to see it. He wasn't looking for it. And so when we look at web pages, they're made to look like pages because that's what people expect to see. And I don't think that that's a very good way to organize information. I think that the kind of internet technology that we have with embedded links, there is a better way to organize information based on the technology, based on the new printing press that we have, that should be able to engage students on a deeper level. Now, all these universities decided they were going to do online education, and most of them did it very badly. And I've been in several webinars like, do you think the classroom will ever come back? Well, yeah, of course it will. People mingle and people want to meet, but it's not the only way to teach, is to have students come in, sit down at a desk, be quiet, and listen to some old guy like me talk for an hour. We should be sitting around and exchanging ideas. I should throw you a question and you should throw me some answers and throw me some questions. And together we should be able to learn something. Now, do we do it in a classroom? Do we do it under a tree? Do we do it online? I don't think it makes much difference. It depends on where you are and who you are. I can do this. I met Dr. Haider Shah online. In fact, this is the first time I've actually met him. This first time I've seen him was today. We've passed messages back and forth and emails back and forth. But the first time I heard his voice was, about almost 30, 40 minutes ago. And yet we've worked together effectively over this period of time. And we didn't have to go to a classroom to do that. We didn't have to meet at the coffee shop to do that. We did that using my phone. I'm sure he was using his phone as well, because we were communicating using WhatsApp, and it's a mobile phone based technology. What makes a smart university? It's not printing textbooks that look like not making web pages that look like textbooks. It's not making incunabula. It is what is it? What is a smart university? Well, I mean, what would it have? I mean, what would it look like? It would be, well, first of all, it'd be fully accessible 24/7. I can access Mr. Google 24/7. I can wake up in the middle of the night and ask Mr. Google what time it is, and he will tell me, or she, I don't know whether it's a Mr. Google or Mrs. Google, but it will tell me. I can say, when was the War of 1812? And it will tell me. It will answer my questions. So, and it doesn't matter. The technology doesn't care what time it is. And in fact, I know that it's 9 o'clock where you are, a little after 9 o'clock at night, and it's a little after 10 o'clock where I am. And we could actually engage in this conversation in a way that's asynchronous. Okay, I can make a video, you can make a video, we can share the videos, we can meet online at Zoom. There's lots of ways for a smart university to reach people. When I first went to university, what was the first skill that I had to learn when I went to university? Well, where do I park my car? Okay, that's the very first thing, because you drive your car up and like, where do I park my car? The second thing is, where's my class? And the third thing is, where's the library? So your first experience in the university is where, okay? It's not what, it's not how, it's not who, it's where. And in a smart university, and those are not useful skills. Okay, I'm not going to be able to go to an employer and say, yes, well, I want you to know that when I was at university, I found every one of my classes. They're going to go, yeah, what? But for a smart university, I know how to use a smartphone. I know how to use a computer. I know how to make a PowerPoint presentation. I know how to make a Word document. I know how to use WhatsApp or Lime. What's it? Lime, I think. Skype. I can take an international conference call while I'm in my car. And you say, well, are these useful skills? Well, yes, they're very useful skills, because that means that I'm productive no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing. These tools, I know how to use these tools, and that is useful. That's a lot more useful than knowing where to park my car or how to find my classroom. So a smart university is going to rely on technology, and how do you use technology, and how do you deploy technology for one purpose only, and that is to communicate, to deliver content, and to provide a space for interactions. The other thing I think a smart university is going to look like, it's going to not only be fully accessible 24/7, But not everybody wants to take a whole course or a module. You would say module. Like, oh, I've got to take accounting, okay? And oh, that's such a big class, and it's going to take 14 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of energy. Why can't I just take a little bit at a time? Why can't I just take a bite of accounting and learn a little bit of accounting, and then you give me a certificate for that, and then I can take another bite of accounting and you can give me a certificate for that, and then I can take Legos. Anybody, you play with Legos? Anybody, the kids play with Legos? My kids like Lego crazy, and the thing about Legos, it's wonderful because you have all these pieces, and you can build. You take these pieces and you can follow the instructions and build whatever it is they came in, or you can just make whatever you want with the pieces. You can take those same pieces and make something else, and then take it apart and make something else. Well, I think Smart University is going to be kind of like Legos, where you take a piece of knowledge here and a piece of knowledge there and a piece of knowledge there, and you demonstrate your mastery of that knowledge, of the learning outcomes of that, and you can stitch them together to drive towards a degree. Certificates, micro-credentials, international recognition, okay? I mean, I know that, I'm in Iowa. You know how many people from Pakistan are in Iowa? Probably none. we don't have, we're just but there are more pigs than people where I live. Just to give you an idea, it's an agricultural state, and there's more pigs than people. And yet here I am sitting in front of, I can't see your faces, but I'm going to presume that a very smart, educated audience from all over the world, where we can share ideas and recognize, okay, our achievements. We're in a mobile, in spite of this pandemic, we are in fact more mobile than we were before. Not because we can get on a plane and go somewhere, but because I can get on my phone and go somewhere. And it was funny when the pandemic first hit. There were these like a efflorescence of webinars, and it was really extraordinary to me because people from really different places would come together to discuss really interesting ideas that normally, or before, I'd have to get on a plane and go to a conference to have that experience. And as much as I like to get on planes and go places, sometimes it's just really not convenient for me to do that. I don't have to do that now because of this technology that took me to the University of Heidelberg some 30 years ago. The use of AI, for example, to interact with learners. You go, artificial intelligence. I don't like that. Well, actually, you will like it because it can, from the university's point of view, I have access to an AI that marks papers. All right, it marks papers. Now, as a professor, I've taught lots and lots of students. I've marked lots and lots of really bad papers. I mean, at the end of the term, I come home. We used blue books, but they're just little essay books. Then they'd come in, I'd give them the questions, they'd write essays for 2 hours or 3 hours, however long it was. Then I'd take these stacks of them home, and then I'd have to sit down and I'd have to read them all. And I know any professors out there who've had to read a bunch of papers, there's some great ones and there's some not so great ones. And there's some really bad ones, and you have to read all of them. I always felt like I lost IQ points, by the end of the term because I had to read so many confused. And then I felt bad because I felt like I'd failed as a teacher, that they'd given me such a bad paper. Well, that is a dreary, boring, repetitive process for me to engage in. And the students would always say, well, what if we don't like our grade? And my response would be, well, I'll look at your paper again, but maybe I was in a really good mood when I graded it, when I marked it. And if I look at it now, I might not be in a good mood and you might get a lower grade. to communicate to them that this sort of marking has an element of subjectivity to it. And plus, I didn't want to have to regrade papers. I would do it if they were really unhappy. But an AI, I have an AI. I don't have an AI. I work with a group of people who have produced an AI that can mark papers. And I think it is absolutely wonderful that they can mark the paper and the student can see the marks. And if they don't like the marks, or if they don't understand them, that's a conversation we can have. That's where we can sit down and have that debate like Abelard had in the dormitories. I'd much rather have that kind of a conversation than to tell a student, look, you've misspelled half the words in this essay. Okay. I don't want to have that conversation. I want to have a conversation around content. So AI is to interact with learners. It's highly responsive. It learns. Okay. That's the intelligence part. It learns, and it learns you. Okay. It learns how to respond to you. Like the computer on the I don't know if you ever watch Star Trek. I love Star Trek. And if you look at my background, you see I live in a kind of a fanciful world because life's too short to be serious. And so I love Star Trek. I just think it sparks my imagination, and it's a nice adventure. I like adventure stories, and they always has a happy ending, which for me, it's a have to. You have to have a happy ending. I'm not going to sit through something just to be sad. And I can get that now. I can go outside and have that happen to me. But the computer on the enterprise, it learns. It responds. You can say, computer, give me an answer to this question, and it will learn you and learn to be responsive. And that's what an AI does. Now, I don't know. When I was in university, the person I hated the worst was the registrar in the university. It was always some woman who would look down her glasses at me, and why do I have to see the registrar? Well, I had to see the registrar so I get a transcript, a transcript of my grades, always needing a transcript for something. And so I was someone said, well, William, we need a transcript of your university record. And I'll tell you, it's been a long time since I've done that. I thought, oh, no, this is going to be forever. Well, there was a website, and I filled in the blanks. And I had my transcript validated through blockchain technology. Okay. So it was absolutely secure, and it was absolutely validated in like 10 minutes. Well, when I first got my transcript, it took me 10 minutes just to find the registrar, much less have to have her go back. And are you sure you need this? Well, you're going to have to pay money for this, and listen to her talk to me. And there was nobody else to talk to. But the AI that functions as a registrar now, it works as a registrar for multiple universities. It says, which university did you attend? And what was the dates of your attendance, and what was your name? And for us, our social security number, which is our sort of identifying our ID number. And once you input that, then it spits out your transcript. And it was very inexpensive, and it was very fast, and I loved it. It was great. I could send it anywhere I wanted to. So the question I'm wrestling with now is, when we talk about, we have the technologies, okay? And are we going to choose to use them to make incunabula, like that page there, pages that look like handwritten? We're going to continue just to assume that they're going to read top to bottom. Think how bossy a book is. You ever think about how bossy a book is? A book is really, really a bossy thing. Now, I know in Arabic they read differently than me. It's right to left. They apologize for my ignorance. And in I think it's Japanese, it's right to left and top down in columns. The pages go right to left, and there's columns in there. And in English and Western, it's right to left, top to bottom, and it's not like you can skip it. Okay, you can't skip it. It forces you to read like that. And I can't tell you how many times I've been frustrated trying to find a piece of information in a book because it just won't let me move through it. But I can take that same book and I can digitize that book. Then I can do search terms and I can find out how many times this word or this phrase appears in this book. And if I can find that phrase, I can then read things around it. Now that's useful. That's very useful. We have the technology to do that. The question is, what are we going to do with it all? And I honestly believe that the University of the Future is not going to be like a metaverse, where we're walking around with these big goggle things on, Zuckerberg's nightmare for the future. I don't know. Maybe it'll be cool. But we're not going to do that because that's replicating what did anybody here remember Second Life? Did you ever do Second Life? Where you had an avatar and you could walk. It was really bad. You it was just replicating our real world, in a virtual space. Well, why would I want that? The real world is so much better. And I don't think the University of the Future is going to be like a metaverse. I don't think it's going to be like that at all. I think the University of the Future, the smart university, may not even be a university. It may be a consortium of universities that share recognition, that share delivery of courses. Not every university can provide all the disciplines well. Maybe they focus on a particular discipline, a particular specialty like IT or like supply chain and logistics or like arts and humanities. And they share content and they share coursework and they share resources. And so as a student, you will get a degree from from a university in the consortium, but it's not a thing. It's a space. And I suspect that that's what the university, the smart university, is going to be like. And we're already seeing some movement in that direction. There's a huge movement trend in the United States coming out of City University of New York, and it's called Earn As You Go. I think it's called Earn As You Go. You earn credit as you go. All right, so you do these micro-credentialings, and I can take a micro-credential from University of North Carolina. I can take a micro-credential from City University of New York. I can take a micro-credential from Rutgers, and they all recognize it. They all recognize each other's credentials, and then I accumulate these things toward a degree. And that's that. For the first time, that serves the student, not the university. Okay, universities aren't here to serve students. If you're thinking that, you should really disabuse yourself of that idea. Universities serve administration and they serve faculty and then they serve students. That's just the way of the world. That's just the way they work. It may be the only industry in the world where the consumer comes last. If I go to Wendy's and I buy a hamburger and I don't like it, I can get on Twitter and I say, I just had a hamburger at Wendy's and I didn't like it. And you know what? Wendy's would come back and say, oh, we're sorry that you had a bad experience. How can we help you with that? Okay. If I go to university and I say, hey, I had a professor and he was boring or she was boring, you know what they're going to say? Too bad. Get over it. Because education is the only thing, it is the only product in the world that you can't buy. You can't buy education. Okay, I can't go to Dr. Haider Shah's university and say, hey, I have a lot of money. Why don't I buy a degree in IT? And he would laugh at me. He'd be like, you can't do that. Well, I have money. Well, yeah, you can pay us money, but you have to earn it after you pay the money. Right? That's the way it works. You can't buy an education. You buy the right to have access to it, but you have to earn the education. Well, if that's the way it's set up, and that is the way it's set up, why can't I be in control of what I earn and what I work towards? I mean, I don't necessarily know. Okay, I'm in business. I've taught a lot of business classes and designed a lot of business classes. So I'll say I want a degree in business. And so the university says, well, we have all these business courses for you to take. and I'm like, well, gosh, can you give me some advice? Well, they can. They can give you advice. What I don't want to hear is you have to show up to class Monday through Friday from 9 to 9:50 and sit in a class and take notes. Okay, that doesn't, because I have a job. I have to work. I have children I have to take care of. We're all busy people, but we all need education. So what I need from a university is I need advice, I need mentoring, I need leadership, I need content. I don't need them to tell me when to show up to class. And so I think that the smart university, like a smartphone, this phone I have, I love this phone because it knows me. It knows my voice. I mean, I can say, I'm not going to say it, but I can say, hello, Google, otherwise it's going to respond to me. And it says, hello, William. And how can I help you today? It knows the sound of my voice. Nobody else in the house can talk to my phone. It knows my voice. And if it can learn my voice, it can learn how I use the phone. It adapts to me. It's not just a phone. It's my friend. And I take it with me everywhere I go. I mean, it's not really a friend, but you know what I mean? It's a companion. It's a partner in my endeavors. And that's why can't universities be like that? Why can't the university be a partner in our endeavors? Why can't a smart university provide me with micro-credentialing, with me making my own path, using my own technology, learning how to do things in a different way? Won't that make me a better employee? That I can reach out to people, that I can make international connections, that I can use technology to facilitate and make me more efficient at my job. Nobody's going to care whether I know how to park my car or not, or whether I can find my classroom or not. They care about whether I can use PowerPoint, whether I use spreadsheet, whether I can use SPSS, whether I can use any number of PeopleSoft. I laugh about PeopleSoft because I always thought that it was a software created to build a whole industrial sector of consultants to teach people how to use PeopleSoft rather than the software itself. It should be smart universities should be like our devices, highly responsive, concerned about how we can, because I don't like grading papers. And Dr. Haider Shah, I know he's going to say it's not his favorite thing to do. It's not his favorite thing to mark papers. Well, I'm going to guess that what he likes to do is he likes to research. He likes to talk to people about his subject. He likes to get feedback on things he's written. He likes to give feedback on work that other people have done. Those are the things that we like. We don't like marking papers. So can we give that to the AI and let the AI mark papers so that we can have a different level of conversation? I don't think we should be walking. I don't mind dressing up in a monk's robes once a year and going to graduation. Okay, that's fine. But all the other stuff, I think we should really update the university. It's been doing the same thing the same way for 1,000 years. And I can't think of another institution that is that entrenched and that ready for change. And I think that what all the pandemic did is the black swan event of the black pandemic brought home the idea that universities must be more adaptive. And it's not going away. I mean, I don't know where you're at over there or wherever you might be. But I know in Thailand, they're getting 30,000 cases a day, and it's scary, and people are locked down. I had a colleague of mine in Vietnam, and he can't leave his apartment building. And so everybody's now forced to use technology to communicate. And, I think that's probably the most positive thing to come out of this pandemic, that and hopefully a renewed appreciation of life because we've lost so many people. So that's my talk. I have a timer here. My smartphone is telling me that I'm almost done. So I'm going to turn it off. And is there a question answer period here?
Yes, Prof. Prof, superb session. I would say the wonderful explanation you have done. And I really love the way you started it from the 12th century. You showed us a wonderful picture, and it was a very self projecting so many things. Then you related to the convocation costume to it, and then you take it to the 15th century, that when there was the printing, and it was looked like the handwritten, because you connect it to the mind, that how it was taken by the people. And then very nicely you have given your own personal experiences. You connect with the technology, that your car was loaded with the books, and how did you struggle with the all these things with the pages and all these things. And then very nicely you have connected to the gopher, that yes, how the technology actually work. And I would say really you were very fine while connecting the different dot, and the way you were establishing the need and the requirement of technology. Then very nicely you have given the example of the gorilla, that it was not noticed by the most of the audience. Yes, very nice, because the minds are were supposed to take for other information. So similarly, then very nicely you have connected the role of the smart university, and what is the difference actually between the smart university and the traditional university. And I love the way you explain the word of education and its meaning, that is lead to come out of that ignorance, that darkness. That's what the universities are supposed to do. University itself means, for to my understanding, is a curiosity about the universe, that what is there outside. So you have to explore it. And then very nicely you have given the example of the driving, that it is the scale, but how you are going to do it, for what purpose you are doing, there are so many questions related to it. And really thoroughly I enjoyed this session, because then you established, and I could see your profile and the way you explained that you went to the France and other countries, and then even in the assembly you presented this online working, and how technology can actually advance our university roles. And then very nicely you have again given the example of your own, of that registrar and all these things, that how can AI actually support us while doing the things so in a so fast manner, and we can be very productive. I loved your phrase that wherever you go you are productive, because we have these tools of your smartphone, your laptop, the tab. All these things are there to support you. And that micro credential you have given, how the different universities can connect, and they can recognize their micro credentials, which are very beneficial. And I love these kind of phrase, that yes, you can take, and you can take the different modules in order that you think that it can be helpful for you, for your career, for your new pathways. And you can contribute the way you want, and whatever the knowledge you require, the university is there to support you. Really, Prof, hats off to you, the way you explain the things. I really enjoyed, because you connect the different dots. You talk about your father and you being professor, and now the latest generation who are all surrounded by the technology, and you are very much connected from A to Z, and still you are so great while explaining the things. And I would say that you have enhanced our understanding towards the smart technology, how it can be beneficial for us in coming generation as well. Really superb explanation, and I was thinking that how great it would be to listen to you for 3 hours. As you mentioned, that 3 hours is a very difficult in a whole week. You can take 1 hour in a whole day by day, but still, I would love to listen to you not for 3 hours, but I would say for 15 hours, because the way you are connecting and explaining the things, that's the wonderful thing. And I totally agree with you, Prof, that what you mentioned is it's the constructive dialogues, the debates, which actually opens up our mind. And I believe that it's more important than the marking the paper, because whatever we see, the different scholars, the philosophers, they always argue, they always challenge the different kind of whatever the philosophies are, whatever the concepts are, the ideologies are, they always try to explore it. And through discussion we learn a lot. That's what we have been doing. That's why we have the case studies there, to problem solving, analytical skills, and so many things. Very wonderful session. Thank you very much, Prof. Once again. We do have certain questions for you, since you have a vast experience of this online education system while launching it, and still you are supporting, and your expertise are so great in that. The first question is very much interesting, and that question is, Prof, thank you very much for such a wonderful session. We learned a lot from this session. Prof, my question is, since you are the expert in this online education system, please recommend us what kind of training would you recommend to improve our digital competencies in response to online learning or the blended learning. This is question from our colleague in order to upgrade his skills regarding the digital competencies. Yes, please.
Well, play. I think play. I mean, to learn how to use technology, you should play with it. You should. I have a son. I have a 14-year-old son, and he's downstairs right now, and he's playing a video game, Roblox, I think it is. The graphics are terrible, and it's a very weak game. But what he's doing is that he has friends, colleagues. He calls them together. They have different skills. They have different abilities. They agree on a target, an objective. They agree on each person's role to achieve that target, and they execute on it. Now, well, what else do you want from a team, right? I mean, I call that management. And he's 14 years old. So, and he's learning it because he's playing at it. He's playing with it and finds out what he can do. He has a headset on. He's talking to him. He's typing to him. He's engaged in the game and engaged in the target. So I would say play. Now, I don't necessarily mean a video game, but you should play with technology and find out what it can do and what it can't do and how it should serve you. I can't tell you, oh, well, you must do tick, that, because that's what works for me. You need to figure out what works for you. And I would say the same thing. I would say the same thing to students. I would say the same thing to professors. I mean, when you walk into a classroom, do you really want to just stand up and lecture for an hour? I mean, aren't there better ways? Wouldn't you find it more enjoyable to use technology and say, okay, I just sent everybody in the room a file. I expect you to read this file, and we're going to talk about this file. We're going to talk about the content, and I've got some questions we're going to have so that you can have a higher level discussion. People like me, like Dr. Haider, Shah, we went into this because we love learning. All right. Where you might say, oh, he's a master teacher. Well, no, I'm a master learner is what I am. I love learning new things. When we were talking earlier before the session started, I learned several things that I didn't know. And for example, that Ramadan in Pakistan doesn't start the same day as it does in Saudi Arabia. I had no idea. And it was like, wow, that was cool. I enjoyed that. Anytime you interact with people, you're going to learn. So whatever tools you need to do that with. I rely, I'm kind of old fashioned because I'm kind of old, but I rely on a laptop because I like to be able to open it up and I like to be able to type with keys on it. I grew up typing on a typewriter. So that's my familiar technology. I like the phone because I can stick it in my pocket and it goes where I need to go. I like using a tablet because, well, it's like a bigger phone, you know. I can see the screen is bigger. In terms of what kind of IT tools to use, I anything that I can share with. Okay, even if I'm sharing with myself, so that I create a file or a document, and then I'm not home, I'm somewhere else, I can still share it with myself. I can still access it, or I can share it with my wife, or I can share it with my colleagues. I have an international team, and we put all our files on a shared space, and we can edit them real time and real collaborative working. So whatever works for you, you know. And the only way you're going to find out what works for you is by playing with it. Don't be afraid to try a different technology and use it and play with it. Watch kids. You know, how do kids learn? Well, they learn by playing. Well, we all learn by playing. And even if it's a new research project that you're focusing on. You know, I grew up on a university campus. My father was a professor. I thought everybody lived on campus. I didn't know there were businesses. I just thought everybody went to university. And the one thing I noticed was that all the students, when they're walking to class, they're all laughing and they're having fun, and it's an enjoyable experience. Okay, it should be enjoyable. You should play with technology not as a burden, not as ticks and boxes, but as use the technology that you feel comfortable with. And the only way you can feel comfortable with it is by playing with it. Play with it. That's my advice. For professors, I'd say it depends. That's a whole different discussion. That's how do I implement technology in a classroom in a way that serves the students and myself? That's a different conversation.
Yes, very nicely said, Prof. Thank you very much for such an elaborative answer. And I would say again, very nicely you have connected the to play, and then very nicely you have given your son example, and then again you related to the kids that what do? They actually play and then they learn. And why don't you enjoy this activity? The more you play, but you have a enjoyable experience only, then it gives you a positive energy, and you try to be more creative in that, and you learn a lot. And this is what nowadays the kids they are doing. They, with the video games and everything, they just curious, and they just try to play with it and try to learn about it. So very nice advice, really wonderful advice. Another question, Prof, is so interesting. They want to ask that, Prof, please share your opinion that what are the obstacles that limit implementation of online learning, and according to you, what are the effective methods to reduce them? Yes, please.
First of all, sometimes I come across as not liking universities, and I love universities. It's my home. Being on a university campus is like being at home for me. So I want you to keep in mind that my comments are within that kind of a context. And my disappointment in universities is their failure to live up to their potential. That there's so much potential they could be engaged in. So how do we get universities to move? Well, we're asking professors to teach in a way they've never been taught. How did I learn to teach? They gave me a fellowship at the University of North Texas. They said, okay, here's your class rolls, here's your textbooks. We'll see you next week. And I was scared to death. I was just a kid. And well, I mean, I was in my 20s, but I mean, I was just a kid. And so what did I do? I did exactly what I had experienced. I walked to the front of the class and I lectured. Instead of being a student, I'm looking at all their faces, and you know what they're doing? They're falling asleep. I'm like, oh, I must be boring them. So I went home. And I thought, I need to lecture better. So I wrote it all out. I went in there and read it to them, and it was worse. Okay. I mean, I thought they were just going to get up and leave. It was so bad. I mean, as soon as the class was over, they were out of there, like I was pointing a gun at them or something. So I went to an old professor and I said, what can I do to engage these students? He said, well, ask them a question. I said, well, what? Ask him what? No, he said, put up a statement that's an outlandish statement write it on the chalk. We had chalkboard, write it on the chalkboard, and then ask them what they think about that statement, and then begin talking to them and engaging them. Well, I'd never been taught that way. I'd always been, you go in, you sit down, take out your paper and pencil and be quiet and make notes, while the professor pours information into your head, and you're tested on how leaky your brain is, how much leaked out, but not how much you actually learned. That I read a study once that you forget in these lecture classes, you forget 70%. In 5 years, you forget 70% of what someone has told you in a we call that a passive learning environment, where someone's talking at you and you're taking notes. You forget 70% of it. Well, back to the old product thing. What kind of a product do you lose 70% of the value of in 5 years? Well, education. So the way you prevent that is that you engage that student somehow, wherever that student is, you engage them. You figure out how to engage them. So I always like to look at my students, and if I have a lot of international students, I try to bring up international affairs. If I have a lot of female students, I try to hit on women's issues in the class. And I think that all professors want to be able to reach their students because they are passionate about their subject matter. Okay. I was always passionate about history. And so if I could, talk about it, that was good for me. It was rewarding for me. And lecturing wasn't rewarding for me. So I think if we're trying to ask professors to do something they can't do, they've never been taught how to do. They were never taught that way. They are doing exactly what they think they ought to be doing. They were taught by people they admired, and they want to be like those people. And so in order to get that paradigm shift, it's going to take students demanding more from teachers. It's going to take visionary people who can see where we need to go and how do we get there. And typically, this is change management. Okay, what you need is a small core of people, of true believers, who can spread the word, spread the vision, spread the ideas, and then be examples themselves. Then you're looking at a new generation of people growing up who are being taught. Just like my son, I could never have imagined that experience for myself as a child. Okay, I had a teaching machine. It was a big metal box with paper in it, and I could. It wasn't a machine at all. It was a container of content, and but for him, he's got all this, and he will expect to be taught like that in university. So I think it's going to take everybody. I think all the pandemic did was that it was like smacking them in the middle of the head and saying, wake up. Well, now they're awake. And the question is, how can we all, because it's to all of our benefit. Okay? It's not just, the university is not external. Universities help lift up whole communities and generations of people. All right. I think they're so terribly important. They change people's lives. They change the lives of the people around them. It is a life-affirming, life-changing experience. And so we need the universities to be better and to do more and to do different. So if you're a professor in a university and you want to find another like-minded professor, go have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and talk about how can we play in our classroom to employ new technology, new devices, and get feedback from the students. And then we'll meet and we'll share our ideas. I mean, that's learning. Okay. That's called learning.
Yes. Very nicely said, Prof. Once again, thank you very much for such a wonderful answer. And Prof, thank you for clearing this impression as well, that you like the university a lot. And it's not like that you don't like it, but the notion is that universities can perform much better. That's what I have understood from your talk. And really, I love this phrase, which I'm going to rephrase in my own words, that universities are there to change our life, change our generations, and that's the big responsibility. And we are looking forward that they play a very vital role in all these things, and we believe and we pray for our institution to perform in a much better way. And the role of technology is very much important in that. And very nicely, you have again mentioned, even though you explained in your presentation as well, the role of technology, particularly like webinars. You have very nicely quoted this. Yes, webinar. You used to travel to the different countries, and it used to be a very hectic and used to be a very difficult for you to go there and deliver a seminar or to attend the conferences. But now you are sitting in USA, we are sitting in Islamabad, and still we are connected, and we are listening to your wonderful thoughts and wonderful opinion and your experiences. And that's, I think, the beauty of the technology, that we are interacting and we are exchanging the wonderful memories, learning stuff, which is very important. And thank you very much for this wonderful answer. Prof, another question is very much related to which I would love to listen to your answer. That is, Prof, don't you think we can assess the students appropriately on in online examination? Uh, what is your say that would we be able to justify with the assessment of student through online examination? Yes, please.
Okay, that's a huge field, this field of assessment, and I tell you, I don't think we do a very good job of assessing students. I think we believe that students should come in, sit down with a blank sheet of paper, and write an essay for us, and then they leave. And in fact, when I did my when I was working on my PhD, and I had to do, there were two stages. You had writtens, and then you had orals. And then if you passed that, then you would go write a book, come back and defend it. So in my written exams, they locked me in a room. I mean, they literally locked me in a room with, I couldn't have a computer, and I had to answer, and I wrote for 8 hours. Okay. And I thought, when I walked out, I was exhausted. And when I walked out of that room, I thought, that is the dumbest experience I think I have ever had. Because what normally I would do is I would have a question. I would go to the library. I would do some research. I would think about it. I would reflect on it. I would analyze it. I would sit down and write it. I would read what I'd written, see if it made any sense. I would check myself. And then I would have a piece of work that I thought was of value and that reflected my knowledge of the situation. Instead, they lock me in a room, they take away all my tools, and they ask me questions, and I'm supposed to just memorize? Nobody memorizes anything anymore. I mean, I don't even know my wife's phone number, okay? I don't. I mean, I never punch it in. I just say, call Tara, and it does. So why would I memorize a bunch of information that I should easily have at my fingertips? I don't think that is assessing a mastery level of a learning outcome. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what is the learning outcome and how much has the student mastered it. And there's lots of ways to do that have nothing to do with coming in and sitting an exam. First, on the online piece, it's been well demonstrated that students can take secure assessments online. Okay, there's no that question has been answered, and there are numerous universities that rely on that. But more importantly, I think that's a terrible assessment. Now, I don't mean that the people who implement it are terrible people or that the universities who implement it are terrible institutions. I think it's just a terrible thing. They do it because they've always done it that way. Just like the robes. If you say, I'm going to show up to graduation in a t-shirt and shorts, they'll go, oh, no, you have to wear robes, because that's the way we've always done it. But so I think assessment, we can assess based on there. We're working with an ed tech. We work with a number of ed tech groups, and one of them is assesses musical skills. So you meet online, and you play an instrument, and it's recorded, okay, and then someone looks at it and assesses your ability and gives you a ranking. Like level 4, level 6. We don't do that in the States. It's a kind of an English thing or UK thing to do. And now they've got a certificate that demonstrates their level of performance, that they can get a job in a symphony orchestra or I don't know what musicians in a studio. I don't know much about the music industry, but I know that there's an online assessment that can give you a feedback, an assessment on your performance level. Well, if you can do that for music, you can do that for any subject. And I'm not even sure that writing an essay is the best way to go about it because, well, I mean, I think people should be able to write, but I'm not. How do you, if you're being assessed on how do you use a spreadsheet, you should be using a spreadsheet. If you're being assessed on how to use PeopleSoft, then you should demonstrate your ability to use PeopleSoft. If you're being assessed on your ability to develop a business strategy, then develop one, and then let's look at it. But writing an essay about business strategy, I get headaches thinking about that. Okay. I mean, in business courses, in strategic management courses, one of the things you do is you develop a business strategy, a business plan, Well, I don't want students writing about a business plan. I want them to make a business plan. All right. Now that's something I can evaluate. Were they paying attention when I was talking to them about, strategic planning and stakeholders and all that? Is that in the business plan? Okay. I mean, I think the best way to assess people is to determine what is it you're trying to assess. All right. And some of the assessments, they're not all the same. Some of them are formative assessments, right? Where I just need to know where I'm at. And that can be a very simple little, it could be a multiple guess, multiple choice, quick, short answer. That's not going to impact my credentialing. But what will impact my credentialing, if I'm an IT person, if I'm taking an IT course and I'm supposed to be able to program in Python, well, I should write a program in Python and be evaluated on that, not to write an essay about writing. If I'm doing art, the same thing. If I'm doing history, do history and be evaluated on history. Don't write about doing history, because that is the old standards. And I think if you're going to ask me a specific question about a specific kind of assessment, I'm going to say, well, what's the content? What's the subject area? What are you supposed to be learning? And then we can evaluate what kind of assessment that I would think would be appropriate for that. In no cases, unless the assessment is on essay writing, would I assign people to write an essay. Okay. If you're being assessed on your ability to write an essay, you better sit down and write an essay then. But if I'm asking you about, international marketing, I don't want an essay on international marketing. I want an international marketing plan. Now I can just say, well, that's something I can evaluate. And I do think, I know, there's no question. I know that the universities are reluctant to do it, but there is no question that secure online assessments are viable and available, even in the old sit down and write an essay world. I would say probably ought to get away from that and look at what. Look, if I go to see the doctor, I don't want the doctor to say, "Well, I wrote an essay on headaches." Well, no, I don't care about your essay on headaches. What are you going to do to fix my headache? Okay, so it should be performative, not an academic endeavor, I guess is what I'm saying. Now, I like writing essays. I have fun writing essays, but I'm a historian. That's what we do. We write. But for business classes, well, you should be able to write a memo. I'll tell you a little story about a real quick one here. When I first went to work for a large corporation, and they said, William, we want you to investigate something. And I did. I researched it because I'm a good researcher. I'm like a dog on a bone, man. I'll go research that. And then, as a true academic, I wrote a 10-page report. And I gave it to my boss, as executive vice president. And he looked at it and he goes, that's a lot to read. And I said, well, it was a lot to write. And he said, well, I don't have time to read this. And he said, can you tell me in a paragraph? Right. So I was like, well, that's just kind of rude. I spent all that time on this paper. You just want a paragraph? So I had to take 10 pages and boil it down into a paragraph. Now that's a skill. Okay. That's a real skill. And that's business writing. He didn't have time to read 10 pages. Okay. All he wanted was a quick look, a paragraph, and move on. Make an assessment and move on. Make a determination and move on. And so why are we asking business majors to write long essays when, in fact, they'll never do that in work? We should be able to assess them based on viable skill sets. And unfortunately, writing essays is not really applicable to most jobs. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Perfect answer, Prof. I would say very nicely you have answered it, and very nicely you have mentioned that essay doesn't mean anything. You need to be very specific, and you need to try to figure out what you are trying to assess. And very nicely you have mentioned, if you could tell me the content and everything, then I will be more able to tell you how to assess it. And I like the doctor example that I would not ask him to write an essay on headache, but I would just ask how to fix it. Very nice, I would say, example. Really, I'm enjoying the way you are giving the answers. It's so wonderful, and that's the beauty of the expert, that they make things easy for the people. And for us, you have given a lot of wonderful new things to understand and to see how it is going to impact our education system. One last question, we have taken a lot of your time, but it's really very interesting, and that's my own question from you. That, dear Prof, please guide us and enlighten us. How do you see the future of education and universities? Yes, please.
Higher education is in crisis right now. It really is. We are seeing massive closures of universities here in the United States. There's financial problems. All right, they don't. The demographics are such that there are fewer young people who believe that going to school full time is a viable option. Right now, it costs $2,000 to acquire a single student to enroll. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's a lot of money just to get an enrolled student. All right. That's cost of acquisition is $2,000. And so they're closing. And at the same time, we have whole areas of the world that people can't get into university. Some years ago, I'd say about 7 years ago, university in Cape Town, I won't say which one it was, in South Africa, they had a limited number of seats. That the competition was so severe that a tenth of a point would make the difference between whether you got in or not. Okay, so the students, if it was a 99.1 or a 99.2, okay, the 99.2 got in and the 99.1 did not. And you know as well as I do that both of those students are darn good students, that there's not a hair's difference between them. And so because they only had so many seats, and the parents of these students literally pushed the gates down to get into this university. And the sad thing is that the library was full of outdated books. The infrastructure was very poor. I mean, they were pushing and rioting to get into an institution that, quite honestly, I wouldn't bother with. And that's how desperate they were for higher education. And at the same time, here in the States, we're closing schools. So I think that the future of higher education is going to be a global platform, because we should be able to reach people in Pakistan or Bangladesh or Chennai or Sri Lanka or Cambodia. Or right now, I've been contacted by a government in East Africa, and it's Africa, everything's always in turmoil, political turmoil, people getting killed and things. And they said, can you help us educate women and girls? Because the more women and girls are educated, the more stable our economy is, and our political economy is. And yes, we can do that. We can export education. We can export these things into areas that are education deserts. And we can make it affordable for students. I was looking at the price of attending a U.S. university, $30,000 a year for an international student. $30,000 a year, which means that only the wealthiest can come. Okay, I mean that's. I don't have words to describe how bad that is. I run out of words. We should be able to make university affordable and accessible to broad communities of people. It doesn't mean that they don't have to work. They still have to work. They still have to earn it, right? But in areas where first generation university students, okay, they can make enormous differences in the community. In an internetworked world, which we are, like right now, okay, We should be able to build business. We should be able to make business connections. We should be able to educate each other. We should be able to provide education and skill development in areas and places that need it, and be able to do so without breaking the bank. And so I think the future of education, it's in crisis right now. It is in real crisis right now, because the students are where you are, okay? And the need is where you are. And so we should be able to meet that need, because we all benefit from it. The world is a better place. The more people that have higher education, the better world we all live in. And so if you ask me what's the future of education, I would say it's in a transnational platform where universities collaborate with local providers to provide high quality, recognizable credentials, and improve the skill levels, and create a new generation of students who will connect with each other to build a business, to be entrepreneurial, to grow their economies, to improve their manufacturing, or we can't. Our supply chains are kind of delicate, as we found out because of the pandemic, right? But what's not delicate? The internet. We can exchange ideas, and we can export and have a supply chain of education that's reliable and dependable, and where everybody wins.
Very nicely said once again, Prof. That's the wonderful thing, that transnational platform, and really the importance of the internet. The way, yes, we are doing right now is exchanging the knowledge and information and the ideas, and the world would be the better place because of the exchanging the ideas, the entrepreneurship, and so much things. What a lovely session, I would say, Prof. It was with you, and very enlightenment session. Because of your vast experience, we learned a lot. Our audience, they would have learned so much from you, because of the different generational knowledge you have transformed to us, and very nicely you have connecting the different dots, which I would say that's the phenomenal, super. Once again, I would say hats off to you, Prof. The way you communicated and the way you explained everything was so fantastic, super. At the end of the session, Prof, we ask our each guest that what is your message to the world as a teacher, speaker, author, researcher, trainer, learner, professional, and educator? Yes, please, your message to the world.
When I took my PhD, that was the one thing I had that no one could ever take away from me. I could be homeless, holding up a sign saying, "We'll work for food," and I'm still Dr. Painter. And education is something that is never lost. It doesn't diminish. It only improves in value. So my message to the world is the most valuable product we have, the most valuable asset we have is education. And it's never wasted. It's never wasted. I took courses in art and history and business and psychology, and people are like, "Well, why are you taking these classes?" Well, because I want to learn about these things. And they have all been helpful. All of them have been helpful in my career. So education is the one thing. I can buy a car, and in 5 years, you can't drive it. But if I get a degree, in 5 years, it's only gotten more valuable. So my advice is educate yourself. It's the one thing that you will never lose value on.
Wow, what a superb message you have given to the world. Educate yourself, and then everything would work for you. Very nice. And that's again, I would say that's the beauty of the expert. They give you so much things in a one sentence, in a one word, and then you can try to explore it more and more. So educate yourself. You will learn how to live the quality life. Educate yourself how to make money appropriately, and how to help the other people, and so much thing. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. William Pinter, for giving us such your time and energy. So wonderful session it was. Indeed, a smart university and leveraging technology for better teaching and learning. Prof has explained in a wonderful way. We request you that please do follow our distinguished guest speaker through his research work, and you can email him for future learning and guidance. He's very generous and always ready to help the people. Moreover, wonderful explanation and powerful elaboration which the prof has done has already will help you to learn more about the role of the technology in upcoming days. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you once again, Dr. William Pinter. I would like to thank our audience who joined us. If you have any additional question about information shared today, please email to us or connect with the prof directly through his email or social media account. Thank you all for your support and liking our session. Stay tuned because many sessions are on the way. Please do not miss any session. Until next session, take care of yourself. Bye.